On a winter evening when London seemed to glitter with 1,000 borrowed stars, Almack's assembly rooms rose like a tribunal of chandeliers and silk, a place where destinies were weighed not by merit but by approval. Carriages lined the street in disciplined splendor, their occupants stepping down with practiced elegance, each aware that a single misstep within those walls could echo for years. It was said that one might survive war or debt more easily than disgrace at Almack's, for here the judgments were quiet, final, and delivered with smiles. She entered without spectacle. Miss Eleanor Ashcombe was not unknown, yet neither was she secure. Her family's lineage was respectable but thinned by time, its fortune careful rather than commanding. She wore a gown of pale blue silk, modest in cut, chosen not to impress but to belong, and she carried herself with the composed restraint of a woman long accustomed to measuring her own hopes. Her eyes moved first to the patronesses, seated like benevolent monarchs, then across the floor where dancers formed patterns rehearsed as faithfully as prayer. Tonight mattered. She did not name the reason aloud, yet every step she took acknowledged it. The Duke of Harrowby arrived precisely when expected, which was to say when the room had already prepared itself for him. Conversation softened, then stilled, as if society itself were drawing breath. He was a man shaped by inheritance and discipline, tall, reserved, his expression governed by habit rather than mood. Few claimed to know him intimately, though many claimed to know his reputation. Unassailable, correct, and famously unmoved by sentiment. Rank clung to him as naturally as shadow, and with it came an unspoken promise that he would never embarrass the world that had crowned him. They had met before, briefly, and without consequence, yet memory has a way of sharpening moments that once seemed small. Eleanor recalled his voice as measured, his gaze attentive without intimacy. He remembered her as composed, intelligent, and inconveniently difficult to dismiss from thought. When their paths crossed tonight, it was not accident but design, arranged through intermediaries who understood how introductions could be offered without obligation. The music slowed, the set changed, and her name was carried to him with all the careful optimism of a wager. He turned. The request hovered between them, delicate as spun glass. Around them, the room leaned in, for Almack's thrived on such pauses. His refusal was courteous, almost kind in its phrasing, grounded in propriety and circumstance, and delivered with the calm authority of a man who had never been contradicted. There was no cruelty in his tone, which somehow made the moment sharper. Politeness, after all, leaves no space to protest. The effect was immediate. Silence settled, not complete but attentive, the way a crowd stills when it senses a fall. Eleanor inclined her head, accepting what had been given as though it were merely an inconvenience rather than a verdict. She withdrew with dignity intact but trembling, each step toward the edge of the room an exercise in restraint. Whispers began at once, not loud enough to challenge decorum, yet swift enough to wound. A refusal at Almack's was not private, it was a pronouncement. From the periphery, the patronesses observed with mild interest. Nothing improper had occurred. Nothing, that is, which required correction. Eleanor understood this with painful clarity. She had not been insulted, merely assessed and found wanting, and society would treat the distinction as meaningful. Invitations would thin. Smiles would cool. Doors would close without explanation. The Duke remained where he was, his posture unaltered, yet something unsettled moved beneath the surface of his composure. He watched her retreat, not in triumph, but with a dawning unease that resisted definition. He told himself he had acted correctly, that order required such decisions, that the rules which preserved his world could not be bent for private inclination. Still, the image of her bowed head lingered, quiet and irrevocable. The music resumed. Couples returned to motion. Almack's absorbed the incident and pressed on, as it always did, indifferent to individual consequence. Eleanor departed earlier than planned, her carriage carrying her away through streets glazed with frost and lamplight. She did not cry. Tears would come later, when witnesses were gone. For now, there was only resolve, brittle but intact. Above the assembly, the chandeliers burned on, illuminating a dance that no longer concerned her. Behind her, a duke stood amid applause and approval, newly aware that he had obeyed every rule and somehow broken something essential. Neither yet understood that the moment would refuse to end there, that what had been denied so cleanly would demand reckoning far beyond a single evening, and that Almack's, so certain of its power, had just set in motion a quieter, more dangerous defiance. Morning revealed what night had concealed. By breakfast, London knew. The refusal at Almack's passed from drawing-room to carriage with merciless speed, acquiring ornament as it traveled. Eleanor Ashcombe's name followed the story like a shadow, sometimes pitted, often weighed, always diminished. Cards that might have arrived did not. Calls were postponed with polite regret. Her mother spoke softly, as though volume itself could deepen the bruise. Eleanor listened, answered with composure, and learned how swiftly dignity could become a solitary possession in a city trained to observe without mercy. Such lessons settled early and lingered long afterwards silently. Across the city, the Duke of Harrowby discovered that correctness offered no rest. Sleep eluded him, chased by recollections he had not invited. He remembered her stillness more than her face, the manner in which she accepted refusal as a thing already expected. By morning, he knew the damage bore his name. Apology, publicly offered, would only reopen spectacle. Silence, however, tasted of cowardice. Honor demanded response, yet society permitted none that would not injure her further. He paced rooms inherited from men who had never hesitated before choosing conquest over conscience without pause or remorse ever once previously recorded. On the third morning, the roses arrived. They filled the Ashcombe entry like an invading tide, red and cream blossoms bound in disciplined abundance. Neighbors paused. Servants stared. Eleanor stood motionless, struck less by beauty than by audacity. There was no card bearing his name, only a brief line expressing regret, written with formal restraint. She understood at once the danger of the gesture. Flowers could be misread, mocked, or weaponized. Yet refusing them felt equally public. She ordered them placed in water and waited for consequences that society would surely deliver, swiftly and without compassion or explanation, as always. The roses came again the next day, and the next, multiplying until the street learned their schedule. Each delivery sharpened debate. Some whispered romance, others desperation. The newspapers laughed softly, printing barbed lines about excess and pride. Eleanor endured the scrutiny with measured calm, yet sleep grew thin. She sensed the Duke's presence in every stem, felt his restraint fighting urgency. He never requested reply. That, strangely, unsettled her most. Persistence without demand felt less like courtship and more like penance unfolding in public view, day after day, watched by all, forgiven by none yet still continuing relentlessly, conspicuously, deliberately. Eleanor's mother urged caution, her voice shaped by long experience. Gratitude could be mistaken for encouragement, silence for acceptance. Eleanor listened, weighing every possibility with care sharpened by fear. She composed no answer, though her hand itched to explain, to protest, to end the spectacle. Instead, she walked among the roses each afternoon, touching petals already fading. Their abundance felt heavy, like debt. She wondered whether the Duke understood the cost of his offering, or whether repentance itself had become a performance meant to satisfy his own unrest rather than repair the injury he alone had inflicted upon her life. The Duke read the mockery with narrowed eyes. Each printed jest-hardened resolve rather than shaming him into retreat. He increased the number, not from vanity but from conviction that persistence must outweigh ridicule. Advisers warned discretion. Friends urged abandonment. He dismissed them all. If society wished spectacle, he would provide one shaped by remorse. Yet privately, doubt gnawed. Was he preserving her dignity or consuming it further? He wrote each note himself, choosing words as carefully as treaties, determined that apology, however delayed, would remain uncorrupted by excuse and free from self-interest, pride, calculation, or expectation of reward later. Eleanor finally sent the roses away to hospitals and parish halls, a gesture quiet yet decisive. London noticed. Some praised restraint, others accused strategy. The Duke observed the redistribution without protest, reading her choice as boundary rather than rejection. He sent the flowers still, though fewer, the notes unchanged. Between them formed an odd correspondence of silence and symbol, played out before an audience neither could dismiss. The scandal softened into curiosity. Something unresolved hovered, drawing attention not for its excess, but for its endurance within salons, doorways, letters, glances, and conversations half finished, half feared, endlessly examined, quietly remembered. One afternoon, a note arrived unlike the others. It requested nothing and promised less, merely asking permission to speak once, privately, without defense. Eleanor read it twice, her pulse steady yet alert. This was the risk she had been avoiding. To refuse preserved safety, to accept invited consequence. She thought of Almack's, of the bowed heads, of roses wilting under scrutiny. By evening, she sent a brief reply granting a meeting, bound by propriety and witnesses nearby, yet undeniably her own choice made with care, courage, and an emerging sense that silence could no longer serve justice, healing, or truth. The Duke received her answer without triumph. Relief came first, then gravity. This meeting would not absolve him, it would expose him. He prepared as one prepares for judgment, rehearsing honesty rather than charm. The roses ceased that day, intentionally, to avoid intrusion upon her consent. London sensed a change. Gossip slowed, sharpened, waited. Something had shifted from display to reckoning. Those who watched felt it, though none could name it yet, only that the story had turned inward, toward consequences not easily observed but certain to test character, courage, and the fragile architecture of reputation governing their world still. Eleanor stood at her window that night, watching lamplight bleed into mist. The house felt altered, quieter yet expectant. She did not imagine romance. She imagined balance, justice, perhaps closure. Somewhere across the city, a duke awaited words he could not control. Between them lay months of damage compressed into days. She closed the curtains, steadying herself for the reckoning ahead. Forgiveness, she understood now, was not a gift but a negotiation with memory, pride, and consequence. Tomorrow would begin that negotiation in earnest under watchful skies, within a city eager to judge, record, and remember every failing, triumph, and... The meeting was arranged for a late afternoon when light softened edges and discretion was most easily preserved. Eleanor arrived composed, her manner neither expectant nor defensive, carrying with her the quiet authority of a woman who had endured scrutiny and remained intact. The room chosen was modest, warmed by firelight, its furniture arranged with deliberate distance. When the Duke entered, he paused as though crossing a threshold that permitted no retreat. Rank accompanied him still, yet he seemed to carry it now as burden rather than armor, aware that ceremony could not shield him from what was owed. They exchanged the courtesies demanded by the hour, each phrase measured, each pause weighted. He did not reach for her hand. She did not offer it. Silence gathered, not awkward but searching, until he spoke first, acknowledging the refusal without adornment. He named it plainly, refusing the refuge of euphemism. He spoke of fear, not of scandal, but of his own obedience to a system that rewarded caution over courage. The confession surprised her less than the restraint with which it was delivered, a restraint that suggested discipline turned inward at last. Eleanor listened without interruption. She had rehearsed responses during sleepless nights, yet found them unnecessary now. When she answered, her voice held neither bitterness nor indulgence. She described the days that followed Almack's, the thinning of invitations, the altered glances, the sensation of being present yet unclaimed. She spoke of the roses, their beauty and their cost, of how apology performed before an audience becomes another trial for the injured. She did not accuse him of malice. She accused him of power unexamined. He received her words as verdict, absorbing them without defense. He admitted the inadequacy of flowers against consequence, the vanity hidden within persistence. Yet he insisted upon one truth, that regret had not been fleeting, that he had learned, too late, the weight of a single public moment. He asked nothing further, neither forgiveness nor promise, only permission to bear whatever outcome followed. In that request lay a humility she had not expected, and which unsettled her resolve more than contrition alone could have managed. The room seemed to contract, drawing them closer through attention rather than proximity. Eleanor considered the nature of forgiveness, how easily it was urged by those untouched by loss. She told him she did not yet forgive, not because she wished to punish, but because forgiveness demanded restoration, not merely remorse. Reputation, once fractured, required more than apology. It required risk. He met her gaze then, understanding sharpened by clarity. Risk, he said quietly, was the debt he intended to pay, though the manner remained to be seen. They spoke then of boundaries, of the terms by which any future conduct must be governed. No secret meetings. No displays that invited ridicule. If he wished to amend what he had broken, it must be done openly and with consequence to himself. Eleanor stated this without challenge, offering it as condition rather than threat. He accepted without negotiation. In that moment, a fragile accord formed, not of affection, but of respect newly earned and cautiously exchanged between two people altered by a single evening's failure. When the meeting ended, it did so without resolution, yet not without movement. They parted as they had arrived, with formality intact, but something essential had shifted. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware that a private reckoning had redefined its public narrative. Eleanor returned home lighter, not because the past had softened, but because the future had acquired shape. Choice, she realized, was returning to her grasp, slow and deliberate. The Duke remained behind, staring into the fire until its heat faded into ash. He understood now that repentance demanded sacrifice visible to those who mattered most. Silence would no longer suffice, nor gesture alone. The patronesses, the assemblies, the arbiters of invitation and exclusion, all would have to be faced. He anticipated their resistance and welcomed it. What he had preserved at Almack's, he would now place in jeopardy willingly. That evening, London sensed little. There were no roses, no deliveries, no notes to provoke amusement. The absence itself became a rumor, stirring speculation without proof. Eleanor slept more soundly than she had in weeks, her thoughts no longer circling helplessly. She did not imagine reconciliation, she imagined fairness. Somewhere beyond her window, preparations were forming that would test whether contrition could survive contact with consequence. As dawn approached, the city lay poised between yesterday's judgment and tomorrow's spectacle. Eleanor woke with resolve steadying her breath. The Duke rose with purpose clarifying his intent. What followed would no longer belong to whispers or flowers, but to action undertaken before the same society that had watched her fall. The balance of power, once unquestioned, was about to be challenged, and neither could predict whether the attempt would restore dignity or compound loss, only that retreat was no longer possible. The evening returned to Almack's with familiar splendor, yet an undercurrent of anticipation disturbed its polished calm. Chandeliers burned steadily, casting light upon faces trained to conceal curiosity, while the patronesses surveyed the room with practiced authority. Eleanor entered quietly, her presence noted not for novelty but for courage. She wore a gown chosen for composure rather than triumph, and as she crossed the floor, whispers stirred, uncertain whether to wound or withdraw. She felt them, acknowledged them, and did not falter, for she had already endured worse than rumor. The Duke arrived moments later, not late enough to provoke comment, not early enough to appear eager. His bearing was unchanged, yet the purpose animating it had shifted. He did not pause to survey approval, nor seek counsel from familiar allies. His gaze found Eleanor with directness that unsettled observers accustomed to studied indifference. The memory of refusal lingered between them, unspoken but vivid, a shared history now demanding answer. The musicians waited. Society leaned forward, sensing decision rather than entertainment. When the set was announced, the Duke moved. He crossed the space separating them without hesitation, each step deliberate, unprotected by intermediaries. Conversation stilled as recognition spread. He bowed, not deeply, but sincerely, and spoke her name with clarity that carried beyond them. His request for the dance was audible, unembellished, and unmistakably public. In that instant, the balance shifted. The rules of Almack's did not forbid acceptance, yet neither did they guarantee safety. All eyes turned to Eleanor, awaiting a response weighted with consequence. She paused, allowing silence to stretch. Within that pause lay weeks of judgment, flowers, restraint, and confession. Acceptance would not erase the past, refusal would seal it. She looked at him then, truly, and saw not entitlement but resolve. When she placed her hand in his, it was with measured calm, granting neither absolution nor triumph, but acknowledging courage met with equal dignity. A murmur rippled through the room, restrained yet electric. They took their places. The dance began. It was not passionate, nor intimate, but correct in every movement, each step an assertion of mutual respect reclaimed. The patronesses observed closely, weighing precedent against propriety. To deny the dance now would require public censure of a duke who had acted within decorum, if not expectation. They remained silent. That silence, more than applause, confirmed the shift underway. As the set concluded, the duke did not release Eleanor immediately. He thanked her quietly, without flourish, and returned her to her place as custom required. There was no declaration, no spectacle beyond what had already occurred. Yet the effect was unmistakable. Conversations resumed with altered tone. Invitations were reconsidered. The narrative began, slowly, to revise itself. Later, as the evening progressed, the duke addressed the patronesses directly, his manner respectful yet firm. He acknowledged his earlier decision without apology to them, only explanation. He stated his intention plainly, accepting whatever consequence their authority demanded. Such candor unsettled them more than defiance would have done. After deliberation conducted in murmured consultation, they offered no sanction. Almack, it seemed, would tolerate this challenge, if only to avoid exposing its own rigidity. Eleanor watched from a distance, understanding the cost of what he had done. He had risked exclusion not for spectacle, but for restoration. The knowledge did not dissolve her caution, yet it softened something long held rigid. When he returned to her side later, it was not to claim victory, but to ask if she wished to leave before the night exhausted itself. She agreed, grateful for the consideration. Outside, the air was cool and steady. Carriages departed with renewed speculation. Eleanor felt neither elation nor relief, only balance returning to ground long tilted. The duke offered his arm, which she accepted without comment. They spoke little, allowing the evening's weight to settle without interpretation. At her door, he thanked her again, this time with quiet warmth, and took his leave without pressing advantage. Inside, Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, aware that something essential had concluded, though nothing had been promised. Her reputation, while not fully restored, had been defended where it mattered most. The roses would not return. The story, however, would continue, shaped now by choice rather than injury. Across the city, the duke prepared for consequences still unfolding. He understood that forgiveness was not yet granted, nor owed. Yet he had acted, openly and at cost. For the first time, that knowledge rested easily upon him. London would decide its verdict in time. For now, a line had been crossed, not back toward safety, but forward into uncertain ground where dignity, once reclaimed, might yet become affection, and remorse, proven through action, might finally find its answer.